Hello and welcome to the Product Opscast with Antonia Landy and Graham Reed. Antonia, welcome. How are you doing today?
I am fabulous. Thank you, Graham, for asking.
Good stuff. Today we are honoured to be joined by Sean O'Neill, CPTO at Synchron, artist and previously data product leader at the likes of Tesco and Amazon. Sean, great to see you and thank you so much for joining us today.
Delighted to be here today.
Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I have been fortunate to spend the last 25 years or so of my career at the intersection of customer needs, business potential, and technology possibilities. And how do you bring all those together with great talent to build things the universe wants and will pay for? And the heart of all of that has always been data.
Today's topic. We're talking about data, metrics, analytics. Sean, when we called up before Christmas, you were telling me really some quite incredible stories about your times at the likes of Amazon and Tesco and how you implemented data strategies to know a lot more about your customers. Kick us off with just a bit of an overview of what you did and what you achieved at some of these places.
Well, so over the years, been very fortunate to work in some really interesting parts of Amazon and Tesco at really, really pivotal times. I've also been in a startup with two other founders in a garage trying to start the next new thing. I've done private equity scale ups where we're transforming businesses from product market fit to business model fit and everything in between. So I've had the good luck to see a lot of different examples across the year. But data has always been at the heart. And it starts with one of my very first jobs out of college was a data analyst. I was in the financial industry doing corporate finance funding and evaluations of businesses. Should Ford Motor Company acquire this other um, vertically integrated seat manufacturer? And how would I model up everything? So I learned early on cash flow. And it turns out just because you have revenue at the top, if you run out of cash, game over. And so that really helps set a lot of details of how to think about the data underneath and what are the right signals to know whether you're moving in the right spot.
Amazing. I think in the show notes, you mentioned that you were kind of doing product management before that was even established necessarily as a widely known role. So I'm very interested, maybe also selfishly, in hearing how you saw, first of all, the role of product evolve in strong conjunction with data. I think especially at Amazon, it's well known fact that you're very data driven, very data heavy. So I would love to hear a little more about that, but also a little more about how you saw folks tackle these jobs that we kind of put under the product ops umbrella nowadays.
Sure. And it's funny when I started, product ops as a term had not yet been established, but also product manager as a term was relatively new. So I had graduated with my MBA from Kellogg Northwestern and was interviewing with a bunch of different tech companies for a variety of different roles because in 1999 was all the rage, dot com. It was all about dot com then. So you think about the Gen AI bubble we're in right now. Well, that's what it was in the late 90s of everyone knew something important was happening here and wanted to be part of it. And I had interviewed with Amazon a bunch of different cycles. I like them. They're like, we want to give you an offer. When I got the offer from them, it said my title would be product manager. I'd never heard of that. I didn't know what a product manager was. And I asked them, what is a product manager? Like, oh, you'll be great at it. It's just this mix of business and technology and build the right things. You're going to be fine. And it's been a great job. But it also comes down to don't get hung up on focus on the activities. What are you really doing? And Amazon has always been very, very data driven. And Jeff, Jeff Bezos, he started off as a hedge fund analyst. He was a computer scientist, hedge fund analyst. And so data has always been very much at the core of everything Amazon does across all sides. And it's always been a tech company first. And so as we were building Amazon, you had to really teach yourself SQL. You had all this access to all the data across Amazon's websites and customer history, anonymized, but you had all this access to the real data to make better decisions. And over the years, as I was hiring more and more product managers and some analysts, one of the most important skills I needed was, can you unblock yourself to get the answers you need to make better decisions? That was a really key skill. So early on, when I was recruiting junior product managers and entry level, I wanted people who had an analytical mindset because Interestingly enough, in my very first role at Amazon, I had the amazing fortune to work in search. Search, machine learning, search relevance optimization. I learned most problems on the digital layer are a search and retrieval problem at some level. You want to personalize something, you want to target something, at the heart, that's search. And search is all about the relevance and the algorithms and the query. And so being able to learn SQL and get answers really goes a long way. But we were also doing lots of A/B tests. And the thing that surprised me coming out of my Kellogg MBA with I had a whole shelf full of books. Yes, you used to have physical textbooks. I had this whole shelf full of books on all sorts of things, on strategy, on positioning, on channels, on all these other aspects. The book I used first and the book I used the most in my entire time at Amazon was statistics because I'm running all these A/B tests and I get all these results. And Amazon had homegrown tools because at the time the web was a pretty early stage and there were not a lot of good tools to run at the scale Amazon was running on. We had to build all our own tools. So we built great A/B testing capabilities, but the operator, which was me, it's kind of on you to interpret a lot of the results. So my statistics book went a long way at being able to understand this A/B test I did. Is it statistically significant at what level? And so I really found the value of good data allowed us to make better decisions. And I started to hire for that skill set because I can't have a bunch of product managers saying, I don't know what to do next until some other analyst who has a big backlog can get to my request to go pull some data. You've got to unblock yourself.
That's I mean that's a really interesting piece in itself, about y- having that firstly having that get up and go mentality for your team to sort of say no, I need to go and find this out because you didn't have the teams around you, the support systems in place to take that role on. We quite often will see that in this day and age in many businesses, many tech businesses, to kind of have that. But very interesting background that you saw there. Very minor point that you said as well about kind of learning SQL and learning kind of query languages and things like that. Would you say that the kind of in 2026 in the AI bubble that's now been replaced by learn AI prompting?
You absolutely should learn AI prompting, but you should not depend solely on AI prompting for queries. My current business, we're spending quite a lot of time with big data all the time for our customers and building data products for our customers. And text to SQL is a very tantalizing thing for a non-SQL end user to be able to just type a business question and be able to actually get real data out, interrogate their data. But the challenge is it consistent to the query you asked yesterday? And we found that even asking the exact same business question in French versus English may result in a slightly different query. Maybe it's an inner join, maybe it's a left join, maybe it's a right join. It can be a little bit temperamental, but not deterministic. And so the path of improvement is so impressive that you absolutely should learn AI prompting. You should check and verify because you want to make sure you're getting the right data. But this whole thing to be able to unblock yourself, I'll give you another interesting example. As a product manager, I worked in many areas at Amazon. I mean, I worked in search and books, which was 70% of the revenue at the time. So that was a big piece of what drove everything. Book search results was the majority of the revenue when I started at Amazon.
Of how
I worked
things have changed.
how things have changed. But I've worked in operations, I've worked in fraud prevention, I've worked in ad tech for Amazon. And at one point, I had the awesome job of launching new retail categories on Amazon. And we were using this ad model platform where we didn't have to do the fulfillment. And I was looking for categories where Amazon had some challenge trying to sell it, a regulatory hurdle. Maybe you needed a prescription. Maybe there was some other challenge on checkout. But and a trusted advertising partner could be able to handle that. And we had this whole ad platform that we could surface products natively in Amazon search results using the Amazon stock identification number in ASIN and have it appear natively with the reviews, buy box, all that stuff. And so I was looking at different categories. Well, I had 10 years of Amazon search across every one of our countries, all queries and what happened with those and how they converted. And so I was able to look at all these categories like pharmaceuticals or ticket sales or prescription contact lenses or alcohol. And I could go check the queries for unmet demand. What are the queries that had the greatest volume that actually had, the greatest volume of queries with no ads to basket based on them? or very, very few adds to basket. And so I was able to figure out that beer, wine, and spirits had huge unmet demand. People expected to find it. This rate they were querying on Amazon. And then I also had contact lenses as another interesting one. And then I had pharmaceuticals and others. And then I took all those queries from Amazon search results, and then I went to Google and I signed up as like a Google advertiser and I checked the AdSense. What were the keyword bidding values? So what would our advertisers be paying on Google? I just joined them all up. And I had this fantastic business case that said beer, wine, and spirits, that's where we start. And we built the world's largest beer, wine, and spirits store with 250,000 offers from all these merchants. And you would click through to lathwaites.com, wine.com. You'd click through to napacabs.com, trusted merchants, and they would do all the fulfillment on their side because it was an ad click for Amazon and even contact lenses. I mean, we're making $6, $7 a click, sending people to contact lens providers because those are such a recurring revenue. So, and all of that came from the ability to query the data set of what are users really doing already on the site with unserved demand.
This is super interesting. As I'm listening to you, I think for many of our listeners, this will sound like the promised land, like, oh, this is exactly how PMs should work. But I think to a certain extent, it will be a little bit foreign to many of us because we've rarely encountered organizations that truly can or do operate that way. And I was wondering if this is something that it's beyond skills, it's beyond capabilities. I think this is something that is cultural, and I think this is something that needs to be fostered relentlessly. And I'm wondering how your experience at Amazon then differed to going to Tesco, for example, later on, and how you saw those two worlds in contrast with one another.
That was an interesting place. So I moved to Tesco in 2014. I'd been at Amazon from 1999 to 2015, 14. So long time, and a little startup in between for a couple of years and back to Amazon. And we wanted to move the family to the UK. My mom was born in England. My grandfather was British. So I had two passports so I could come without a visa. And joined Tesco, and I loved Tesco. I genuinely did. And you wouldn't think a company that sells bananas could be so technologically advanced, but Tesco is an incredibly impressive place behind the curtain. You wouldn't normally see it with incredibly strong talent. But when I joined in 2014, product management was still a relatively new function, and many parts of Tesco were still trying to figure out how to adapt to it. In fact, the product management function across Europe in the UK really is only 15 years old or so, really. Because I tried in 2008 or 9 to move from Seattle to London and get a job in product management. And at that time, across the UK, maybe there were 10 companies who knew what a product manager was, and only one or two were hiring. The market wasn't formed for product management yet. So it's important to have context that product is still the new role at the table across a lot of these companies. And I know a lot of times people will say like, well, why aren't there more chief product officers? I mean, why isn't there a path to CEO from the CPO as much? Well, we got to earn it. You've got to earn that credibility and trust. And if the product management role is only 15 years old, the role as a CPO in any real frequency is probably only 8 to 10 years old, still relatively new. And that also means at a board level, it's really kind of in the last 5 years. You started to see boards wanting to hire maybe not just a CTO into their board ranks because everyone wants to know about Gen AI and AI, but they're also scared at the board level about cybersecurity risks. So they want the CTO role. But now they're also thinking about CPO. So we've got to earn it is probably the back story. So now back to your question, like how is Tesco different than Amazon? Well, so Tesco is quite a sophisticated place. And Tesco, when I joined, was the world's largest grocery home delivery company for e-commerce. And it was probably 3 billion pounds of revenue at that time, I think, and operating in 14 countries. Tesco's very first e-commerce order ever was 1986 with a university, I think it was a Newcastle University experiment with over a television with teletext to be able to place an order. Tesco has always been cutting edge, but the product management side is a relatively new ingredient. And so when I arrived, it was part of a much bigger digital transformation across many parts of Tesco. How do we leverage the data? So Tesco was genius on Club Card. When Tesco launched Club Card, way before most grocery stores were thinking about identity and frequency and preferences and personalization. So that has actually been a huge asset for Tesco. But in other areas, they weren't pushing the envelope enough. And so a lot of when I arrived was into the e-commerce side. Originally, I came into just one of the e-commerce businesses, which was the international grocery home shopping. At that time, probably £100 million revenue business, but we rapidly consolidated all of these. So when I joined, there were 35 or 40 e-commerce websites around the world for Tesco and probably 70 mobile apps that had some transactional or identity element. It was chaos. Any marketing team could, we had a Tesco Spider-Man movie marketing promotion app that you could register your identity in from a movie that came out 7 years ago that was still in the App Store and confusing customers. So it was kind of a bit of a chaos thing and really just trying to clean that up, bring all these teams together, start to consolidate the stacks. And a big piece of what we had to do was what bets are we going to start making? And so this is where I had started to add in some of the roles that are really key. And we didn't use the word product ops. We already had a good, very talented data analytics team and product analytics team in the online space. And so we had added more roles there, especially on A/B testing and really being able to control and test these things. But we also had a lot of tension with the commercial teams at the time because I came from search, and search is kind of my first career love of a discipline in a space. And at the time at Tesco Search, we had someone in commercial manually managing a list of what products should show up higher for certain keywords, which is just bonkers because we had thousands and thousands of products that you could find, and they were constantly coming in and out of stock, and the availability was changing, and customer preferences were changing. And so it took a lot of time to build credibility with the commercial team. And one of the ways we were able to do it was through OKRs. Now, we didn't call it OKRs at the time, we just called it our goals. But we had this super important insight for Tesco. Super, super important. We had learned, and this was before I had arrived. Right when I arrived, we had this analytical team company do a study for us of every Tesco shopper who had just started in the last year and had looked at their entire spend in the first 10 months of their life with Tesco. And again, for grocery, you could be shopping quite frequently, but they looked at their entire spend and then segmented that based on how long did their very first shop take. Did it take 15 minutes to completely close and check out? Did it take an hour, 2 hours, 3 days, 7 days? It counted everyone who at least finished, but it segmented them. And the most important insight from this data was that if your very first shop for Tesco could complete in under an hour versus more than an hour, you shopped 3 times more in the first 10 months in terms of revenue. You spent 3 times more because you could see it be a habit. Now, this insight was so key because it allowed me to create an OKR. It allowed me to create a friction metric. And one of the other hard parts of any complicated business is a team could work on the homepage. Another team might work on the checkout pipeline. Another team might work on help pages. Another team might work on detail pages. You got another team who might work on search and search relevance. And across all of these areas, you might see, well, it looks like it worked a little bit, but how did it affect the end basket when everyone else is also trying to do other things? So I was able to create this metric called friction. And the goal for all of our teams were to reduce customer friction. And friction is measured of how much effort does it take to achieve an activity? How many page views do you have to go across to find one item worthy of adding to basket? Page views over adds to basket. Lower is better. A number of 1 means every page you saw had an item worthy of adding to basket because it was so relevant to you and what you're looking for. So now we set this goal. And the beauty of this goal is that every team can now run an A/B test, and they can actually use this as one of their KPIs of what was the friction of my pages. And this is also a good Amazon skill in the analytics. The scale is normalized. The scale is the same whether you're looking at one customer session over every page, whether you're looking at a particular page type over a day, a month, a week, a year, a lifetime, whether you are looking at a cohort of customers, the scale never changes. So you can actually time series this in important ways. and not worry about your scale bouncing because you were counting up some activity that will be more in a year than it would be in a second. And this also gained buy-in from the commercial teams because they saw the same study and they agreed, wow, if we can do this. So this empowered all of our e-commerce teams to run fast and test lots of things and be able to figure out how to advance it. And I didn't tell our search team to go fix search typos, but when they saw the problem, they then looked at the worst problems and we found out like there's 15 ways to spell hummus. And most of them are accurate based on different products. But at the time, we were not doing any search dictionary in our search. So if you spelled hummus 2 different ways, you would get 2 different result sets. So the team solved that. And that had a huge lift in relevance of expanding search results based on your query because we started doing typo corrections and synonym dictionaries. And then we never had any recommendations on the site. The team said, let's go add some recommendations. And then all of a sudden, if you're adding cod to your basket on that detail page, you'll get a little tile that'll pop up in the mobile app that says, oh, how about, we don't know you might be making fish and chips, but from everyone else who bought cod, this is what they bought. How about lemons, peas, fips? And suddenly, one page view, you can have 4 ads. And suddenly you start dramatically improving it. So the value of this over the course of the year is we actually improve the productivity for customers and the conversion of the site. And I'm trying to remember the numbers. I think we allowed customers from this baseline, they basically were buying from the same pages. We increased ads to basket by 4% while reducing the number of pages they needed by 8% on a page view basis. So that's a 12% efficiency gain. And that not only drove the business and allowed us to increase revenue per session and grow, it saved our customers 3 million hours a year. 3 million hours. And so for our heavy customers, that was over 10 hours of time saved. We gave them back enough time to watch their favorite box set. We gave them back enough time to be able to spend time with their family because, as much as we think about selling bananas, the reality is for a lot of our customers, these are low consideration purchases. They just want to get the right stuff they want and be done. And we were able to do it with the right goal.
I don't even know where to start to pick up on that. It's I think for anybody that's watching, and I might actually put this kind of in the piece when we put this episode out, is that that was a very heavy piece, but it was super interesting just to hear the journey and all the little steps of kind of pieces I've written down here, like how you enabled those teams to kind of see those results. And I would imagine as well, there's a piece I was thinking about as you were talking is, how have you kind of put this and the results in particular in front of those kind of commercial teams and those business leaders, that's not in the nitty gritty, but how did you kind of then explain the efficiencies, the progress, ultimately the increases in revenue that you've seen to those leaders in a way that they can appreciate because you're so focused on the data where they're not going to be?
Well, this is a very important point. Product development organizations as a whole, all of our roles, we speak a foreign language and we forget it all the time. And we talk like in terms of, we are going to be agile and we are going to validate and we are going to iterate. But a lot of our other stakeholders, they only have vague understandings of those terms. And in some cases, they may have a bitter interpretation of what agile means if they've interacted with terribly run product orgs before, where agile means we don't know what we're doing and we don't know when we're done and we're going to change our mind all the time and don't hold us accountable. Because there's a whole lot of terribly run product orgs I've seen across the field that have tainted the good name of what product development can be for a company. So you've got to earn credibility. And part of earning credibility is my product organization and my product leaders share the same goals as the commercial org. We have a target against revenue. We may transform that into revenue per session or something else that it ladders down from revenue. I think our goals for the year were pretty simple, but we had revenue per session. We had reduced customer friction, that metric I gave you of page views over ads to basket. We had consumer net promoter score. And then this was 11 years ago. I can't remember. We had probably one more in there, but not a lot of goals. But goals that the commercial team agreed with. And this is where a lot of teams go wrong with OKRs. Because sometimes teams think we want to be autonomous. Autonomous sounds like a separate company. Autonomous doesn't sound aligned with your stakeholders. And the real secret to great OKRs and to empower teams is they are a social contract with your stakeholders. You set them together. And then when you set your OKRs with your stakeholders, that's when they say, okay, I'm going to take my hands a bit off your steering wheel and I'm going to allow you to steer more, because the reality is I've closed off paths. OKRs actually give more control to the stakeholder, not less, because it determines outcomes. These are the outcomes that I'm going to hold you guys accountable for, as opposed to these are the outputs I want to hold you accountable for. So you really got to make sure that you build credibility of set the goals, and then we have dashboards. We're tracking them and we're transparent with them across the company. So everybody can, well, it wouldn't within the e-commerce business. So everyone can see how are we doing against these things, because transparency is super important. A lot of times there's misassumptions across stakeholders of what will work. And sometimes you'll get an exec in who thinks my idea is so brilliant. You should just stop questioning me. And why aren't you coding in this very moment on my most brilliant idea? And the reality is most ideas fail in their original form, and nobody wants to admit that. Everyone likes to see the successes. And if their idea had some kernel in it, they have this rosy glow that their original idea was exactly what was delivered, but that's almost never the case. So we try and be as transparent as possible with it. And that's also where some of the other product ops umbrella functions that I have include one I call portfolio program. Again, I didn't use the word product ops because it didn't exist. When I joined Tesco originally, one of the key ways it was very different than Amazon was Amazon feels like from the outside, it's this big corporate hierarchy. Not true. Think of Amazon's operating model as a venture capital portfolio of startups funded with headcount. That's how Amazon operates. And so every year, Amazon goes through a business cycle where you have to present your business back, and Amazon will fund more headcount, invest more in you with the capital allocation for great ideas that are growing. And if you have a business that is stalling or declining, they will take capacity each year away and redeploy it. And so it's very common across Tesco to do this. In fact, one sidebar here, you think about how Amazon has advanced so much. 20 years ago, one of the questions every year Jeff Bezos and the exec team asked everyone presenting was, how are you leveraging machine learning to disrupt your industry? 20 years ago. This was not a technology question. This was a business question. This was a question to the business and tech leaders of each of these little units. How are you disrupting your space? Not how are you applying machine learning? How are you disrupting? It's an impact question here. And so for 20 years, Amazon has been thinking about AI and ML on how to get leverage out of it for business impact. And that is a big difference about when I arrived at Tesco. There were a lot of other questions at Tesco where, well, those are tech team questions. Those aren't commercial questions. And they kind of separated them. The other challenge was Tesco operated around budget setters. And this is a problem in a lot of bigger companies where you've got budgets that are attached to your organizational hierarchy. And there was this one painful example where at one point the CEO of Tesco was chatting with Edmund, our CTO, and I can't remember what exactly it was, but we needed to go faster on some important thing. It might have been a merchandising compliance thing that was coming up. And the CEO was concerned about it. And so Edmund said, all right, fine. And so we spun up 2 squads in engineering to work on it. Now, this was not my product area at the time. This was managed over in the merchandising area. But the merchandising team didn't have any open headcount to add to product managers for these 2 squads. So they did not. And we had this disconnect between, and by the way, if they had 2 more headcount, they would not have put it into product management. They would have put it into merchandisers who would directly drive revenue by buying more stuff. So we had this disconnect of organizational incentives and alignment. And so while it looked like we had 2 squads set up for this merchandising compliance initiative, the reality is it made no progress. It was burning red on its status, but you wouldn't know it because it looked like we stacked it. So I came up with this portfolio program approach to try and see, how do I get to a single pane of glass plan on one page, consolidate everything down. And I want to see, what are the bets we're making? What are our capital allocation choices of our precious product engineering, design, dev, analytics capacity? Because those were all fragmented across 4 or 5 different organizational budget lines. And so you couldn't see where we staffed properly. How are we going to run this? So by getting to everything on one page, we then, with the leadership team across first the online space and then later across the bigger business, we could see, well, what are our overall initiatives? And do we want to launch new product categories? Do we want to launch new countries? Are we trying to refactor? We were refactoring the core grocery website, which at that point was 3 or 4 billion revenue, onto the new Node React service-oriented architecture we had built and started in the international space where I was at. Big initiatives that are going to take a lot of capacity. Oh, and GDPR. So we have all these different line items of what we're trying to optimize. And some of them were also put recommendations across the website, which we knew would drive revenue. So we had all these different competing elements. Which one goes first? So this framework allows us to decide what's our top priority, second, third, fourth. They're force ranked for a reason. And then we can, and by the way, security, always number one. And then we could decide how much capacity should go into it. What outcome do we expect from it? And then let's track it on a periodic basis, a monthly basis, this portfolio cadence of governance. Are we meeting our goals? In some cases, you may find something is working so well. How do we double down on it? Where would that capacity come from? It's not brand new teams. You got to steal capacity. So this framework allows you to see what is our overall plan. And this has been so useful. In fact, I wrote a whole article on it that's on my LinkedIn. You don't need more engineers. You need better strategic bets. And this allows us to have a better view of where is our capacity actually being spent. Because there's times when I'll come into a company and everyone's like, why aren't we making more progress on the strategy? And it turns out 95% of our capacity is spent doing other stuff, not the strategy. You want to make more progress on the strategy, you got to agree to stop doing some of this other stuff. And by surfacing that across the entire executive team and to the board, you actually have a light bulb moment where they've never seen it. They don't have this visibility to it. They just think it's happening because at the board, they want to talk about the strategy. They don't talk about all the bug fixes and the cost of maintenance and the tech debt. And they don't talk about all the customer commitments that might come in. But when they see the relative mix, they're surprised. And then we can have a more honest conversation about what's the mix we should have.
So interesting. And I think a lot of what you talked about, not just about this portfolio management approach, but also in enabling your teams with goals and access to data, a lot of this very much resonates. And a lot of it, I feel, would now fall under product operations, right? Under this umbrella term. But it just proves once again that these jobs always needed to get done, right? We may not have had this specific label for it in the past, but it's this whole idea of holding up a mirror to the organization, because data is wonderful in letting us know how our customers behave, but we also need to leverage our own data to understand, exactly as you say, where is the money going? Where is the investment going? Is it going where we believe it's going? Should it be going there, right? And in what way is it actually helping us propel our own organization and our own business forward?
Exactly.
You said something very interesting earlier about AI and ML. In fact, we're going back a couple of conversations now, and I took a note on it. About Amazon was asked the question, how are you leveraging AI, rather than the question which so many businesses will and business leaders will probably ask today is, well, just go and put AI in it. We've got to be AI. We've got to be AI first and things like that. But actually, the question long before that and was absolutely relevant was to say, well, how are we doing? What are you doing with AI, ML, and and by virtue, what's the impact that is having as well? And that's such an interesting tweak and an important one, rather than, let's say, just going, we've got to have AI and everything these days.
And there's a huge risk to companies today that they are doing what I would call theatrical AI. They have it in there to tick a box. And frankly, there are a number of uninformed buying offices in the market over the last year who have, they've got on the RFQs, what are you doing with generative AI? What are you doing with AI? They aren't asking, tell me how AI is improving the output of the product for me. They aren't asking, how is generative AI improving productivity for my employees? They literally have this function box. And it makes me laugh a bit, because imagine if you went into an automotive dealer and you went into you went into a Volkswagen or BMW dealer and you say, I'd like to buy this car, but I need more pistons. I'd like more pistons. And in fact, I want pneumatic pistons. And they will look at you a little puzzled, like, well, where should we put these pistons? I don't know, put them where pistons should go, but I need more. It's dictating a feature. It's dictating a methodology. Now, I've been working with AI and ML my whole career. It is incredibly powerful. It genuinely is incredibly powerful. And in fact, I'm advising some startups right now that are doing machine learning modeling and optimization, and it's impressive of how fast you can really go with it. But there's this famous computer scientist, Larry Tesler. He was one of the original Xerox PARC engineers way back in the day. And I had the great fortune of working with him for a bit at Amazon. And I was such a young guy, I didn't even know who he was. And he was so humble, he didn't even say his amazing background. But he has this great quote that says, artificial intelligence is just stuff we haven't done yet. And once we've done it, it's just tech. And so there is this bit of like magic pixie dust around AI right now, but it's still technology and it's still methodology. And what matters more than ever is whose problem are you going to solve with it? The product management role is still incredibly important here about understanding a job to be done for a target market, understanding that how big is that total addressable market? Is it even worth going after? What's the competition look like? Why is it a pain point worth solving? And if we were to solve it in this way, will the universe pay for it? Will somebody in the universe pay for it? You got to get back down to, does the universe need it? Is still a very important question. So, as I'm mucking around with Cursor and GitHub and Vercel, and I'm so impressed with what you can really do with it and how fast you can iterate on it with prompts. But it still takes quite a lot of cleanup from a product perspective to get a user experience that works. And I'll tell you, we are about to be in a stage for customers where it's going to be chaos when a company allows 50 different people to build agentic front ends that do not look at all like they're the same company. You're going to have such a cognitive load of users that it's going to be painful for a bit. And there's probably a very good consulting business 12 months from now to come in with the dustpan and clean it all up and actually put something in place that looks like the same company actually designed.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think Hugo Froes made this point on LinkedIn a couple of days ago, just saying like even 6 months ago, 12 months ago, companies were so incredibly cautious about adding new tools into their tool stack, about who gets access to what, how much we're paying for what, who is implementing what. And now all of a sudden there is just these swaths and swaths of people who are going, okay, yeah, with these 5 new AI tools, you can get everybody to vibe code brand new experiments right from day one. And I think like as someone who's also worked in places where A/B tests were the standard, multivariate tests and all that, like I fear for the analysts and the product people who have to make sense of everything they're throwing at the wall 2 months, 3 months down the road.
Well, fear for the users. They're the ones who are going to have to put up the
Them
proof.
too.
I remember there's this parallel probably about 5 years ago. I ran into one of my prior heads of design at Tesco, Richard, fantastic designer, and he was working for a bank at the time. I might have been RBS, I can't remember. And we were at a product conference, and his boss's boss, or even a layer above that, was on stage talking about how RBS is doing all this digital work. And I'm sorry, RBS, if it wasn't really RBS, but you're top of mind here. And talking about how they'd implemented this tool that allowed anyone in the bank as an employee to create and run an A/B test on the website. And they were just talking about there were 400 A/B tests running right now. And I'm sitting right next to a very talented head of design. And I turned to him and I asked, so 400 A/B tests running concurrently that anybody in the company could create, how's that going? And he just shook his head and he says, total chaos. Because they all didn't look the same at all. Like let's move the call to action buttons. Let's change the colors. It makes me think back to the early days of web when I was starting, where people thought the blink tag was a fantastic way to get customer attention. You're going to have a little bit of chaos like that until people figure out usability still matters too.
Let's we're almost coming up on time for this episode, and we could absolutely keep talking for hours on this. Many questions. General theme, I think, for for a lot of what you've said today has been about obviously the use of the data, the analytics. How have you seen that translate into kind of not just outcomes, but in terms of the speed of outcomes in a world that's increasingly about, being there first, pivoting very, very quickly, taking advantage of opportunities? Where have you seen that, being important and using that data to kind of iterate very quickly and make, very, very quick and swift changes to what you're doing as a business, big or small?
Well, it helps if you have good, well-structured data stores as the start. And I'll give you some examples, but as much as all these companies are going crazy about generative AI and want to hire as many AI experts as they can, actually the very first hire I'd make would be a great VP of data platform, because garbage in, garbage out. And in this day and age, little bit, I love side comments. So here's another one. In this day and age, so many companies have this moat around their business because of their domain expertise and the depth of their knowledge. And they're a bit complacent right now. And there was a PE fund, the CEO had recently had this great point that in this day, incumbents have a head start, but that's not a permanent advantage. That's not a permanent moat. And it's what you do with it that matters. And this comes back to data, because in this day and age, you could have a competitor like a Palantir who is amazing at the technology platform that they have built that allows them to model up whatever your data is and problem you have something working in a matter of weeks as a prototype and a matter of months in production. And a lot of other companies think, well, they don't know our domain. Don't be so secure. But what they won't have is your data. And data is the new moat. Proprietary, high quality data that you can train and build on, that you can develop your models on, that nobody else has access to. That is a true differentiation. So it always comes back to having the data. So now to your question, where are examples where you've really been able to move fast? Well, a lot of this has come from places like an Amazon or a Tesco. And in fact, at Tesco, in many cases, we were working on optimizing van routing and how do we help route vans around. And it's a very challenging problem with millions of orders to deliver a week. And then how do you route the slots and how do you group all the orders to optimize for delivery time? Some stores you can't deliver past 7 or 8 p.m. at night. There are speed constraints. There's occasionally road construction. You've got to make sure that you have fuel and overtime. It's a very interesting, complicated problem. And having all the data rapidly available allowed us to not only test the models, but then with real drivers and real routing, actually get each day, how are the models working and how do we iterate on those? So in that case, we never would have been able to achieve that without having the right data available.
Yeah, very interesting. We recently recorded a podcast episode with Timo Dechau, which I'm a massive fan of, and we got quite in depth about how can you level up the organization in terms of data maturity. And I mean, even hearing you speak about Tesco and the 70 different apps and the identity persisting or having to persist through all of those different websites, apps, states to actually even just make sense of the customer journeys and customer behavior is so integral to everything else you will do on top of that. But one thing I wanted to ask is, I think a lot of listeners and viewers will be wondering, how can a quote unquote regular organization, for lack of a better term, get there? What's step one in enabling ourselves with the data we already have? Because I see this so many times that companies are sitting on a lot of data and really valuable data, but they don't know how to translate that into action, specifically actions product managers can take and product teams can take to ultimately build better products.
Very important question. And I think there's two elements to it. So in one case, first I'm going to start in a world before agents and agentic is part of the workforce. And then I've got a add-on answer when we're in an agentic world. So in the first place, it's one of the challenges in business to business enterprise SaaS is you already have large, sophisticated, complicated applications that customers are using. And then you have a team work on some new component or function in it that's part of the same subscription. Did it add value? Very difficult question to ask. Did it add value? And I know one way to know it, I know one way that it did not add value is if nobody ever uses it. And just because someone uses it, maybe it added value or didn't, but bear with me here. So one of the things we did at GFK and doing at Synchron is as we launch new major pieces of functionality, I wanted to know an estimate from the product team. When we launch this, in the first 4 weeks, when someone has access to it, who is an eligible user, what percentage of them are going to try it in the first 4 weeks? And of those trials, what percentage will repeat 4 weeks after that? Trial, repeat, two numbers. And This is really useful because what we're trying to find here is not product market fit, feature market fit. And we want to know, did this feature add value? One way, the best way is to interview everyone. Not everybody has time to do that. Not everybody has access to all the users. But as one indicator is, if somebody repeatedly uses it and they're voting with their time to keep using it, that can be one strong indicator of engagement. And if you have, say, 50% of people try it, and only 5% of those trialists repeat, you have a proposition problem. You're not done. This is not adding value. And if you are in a feature factory where commercial teams are like, get to the next feature, get to the next feature, you have to say, let's look at this. We've not added value. No customer is going to allow an increase in their rate card at renewal based on this feature because they're not using it. We're not done with this feature. So we've got to keep iterating on the product side. If instead you have 5% trial and 50% repeat of those 5%, well, that's an awareness problem. You're adding some value because some of those personas might not be the exact target. Maybe they're a senior manager who's not a daily user, but you have an awareness problem. Maybe you need more product marketing. Maybe you've buried it too deep in the nav. Maybe you have a confusing label that the user doesn't know what they will expect. It's an awareness problem. But in either of these cases, you don't have engagement. What I'm really trying to measure is engagement. Now, in an agentic world, maybe they're not even using an interface. Maybe if you have an API, they might even be calling an API. But this is the other part of the data set. You have logs. Even if you've not instrumented your front end, we were using Amplitude at GFK. They had a whole setup that made it very easy to calculate that trials and users. It's all built in. Loved it. Even in your logs, if you have activities for some workflow of how many decisions were made, you can actually be able to check it even if you haven't instrumented the front end. You can look for activities that represent a decision was made, some commit, some move forward of the workflow. You should be able to measure. To part of my Amazon, I was also a Six Sigma green belt. So spent a lot of time thinking about dwell time and throughput and velocity. And even in an agentic world, what agents are actually doing is making decisions at scale. And you can actually be able to find where are the execution points, the commit points, and you can figure out how have the dwell times changed, how many decisions are being made, how many decisions made are later reversed. There's all sorts of data you've already got. What you've got to do is be curious about how are your customers interacting with your platform. And by the way, if you're tracking all of these log files, you're going to be able to detect lapsing as well early, because you're going to find some pattern of decision commits in your logs, and then all of a sudden it tapers off. And sometimes what happens is people rotate in a company, and one person moved out, someone else came in, maybe they don't even know about your tool. Or maybe your tool is so complicated, the prior person was an expert, the next person is a business generalist as a career, but they don't know your space is deep. So be curious about your own data, investigate it.
Wow, that's an incredibly important point, and love how we've just brought this back to Antonio. Really great to ask that question, to bring it back to what are the foundational steps to get started for anybody watching here. We are out of time for today. As I said, we could have gone talking on for hours and hours about so much of your experience, Sean. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
An absolute pleasure. Please do connect with any of us on LinkedIn. I think there are a couple of resources that we will share as part of the release for this as well, so do look out for that. Thank you to everybody watching today. Antonio and I will be back on the next episode of the Product Opscast. Thank you, everybody.